One. Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, whenever you happen to answer this Truth Bomb riff. It is my pleasure to welcome, and I'm not going to actually say his name, even though it's got it right there. I guess you don't mind it's on there because this is a bit of an experiment. We're recording this on Sunday, August 24th at approximately 6:15 Eastern Time, and this gentleman and I have come into contact with each other because of a lot of my endeavors, and he has been very thorough in his criticism and in his comments and also forthrightness about steering the conversation in a way that he wants me to understand a lot of the information he has because he thinks I'm falling short by way of some of the information that I'm revealing. And I thought it would be great to be able to connect with you, Brad, and just see where it goes. And I remember being impressed with one of your emails that you had sent to me. Obviously, you are an educated guy. I think you came out of, if memory serves, Carnegie Mellon. Is that right?
That's correct.
Yeah, and I
Yes.
think you studied engineering. Is that right?
It is an engineering style degree. It is information systems to be specific. So
Information systems.
it's not quite computer science, but it's not quite business. It's like two parts of three of computer science and one part of business. And a
Cool.
lot of people consider information systems to be computers, and that's true. The thing that is unique to what I've been doing is that I've been applying it to two different other realms. One being consciousness itself, which is
I
one
don't.
of the vastest systems we have, and
Sure.
then the other is law. And the interesting thing about applying systems is that law is an information system. It's one of the biggest information systems we have.
Yeah.
And there's a lot of things that are inherent to it that a lot of people do not know. And it's fascinating some of the things that are in there, specifically that attorneys are not telling us. And a part of it is there's a lot of assumptions that they make. That's not to say that they aren't wrong, but it's just we don't know, and we are. It's difficult to ask questions about things we just don't even know exist. As Roseanne had said, you don't know what you don't know.
Well, true, and I've learned that on this incredible adventure that I've been on. It's been an odyssey, and I learn more every single day, and I certainly don't know it all, as especially as it relates to the law. I know certain aspects of it that fit the kind of paradigm of the investigation that I've fully had to wrap my head around that I think
Mhm.
reconciles the power structure of the United States in a way that nobody else is willing to offer. Because everybody I come across, if they've been around for decades on a certain, let's just say in a certain sort of space and a come from, that they can only go so far and they're only willing to go so far. And there's
Right.
certain like elements. And so what my investigation has led me to understand in the way I present it all the time, and I believe this with everything that I am, is that it's the largest criminal conspiracy and cover up in the history of the world that
It
has
is.
led to the largest transfer of wealth in history that never ended. Now,
That's
there
right.
could be, and this is usually how I kind of parse it in my mind, right? I mean, there's been there history is filled with horrors, right? And so
Oh, absolutely.
we could go back 1,000 years and consider, pogroms or different genocides, and then of course North American genocide, and there's things that are up there with the worst things that history has ever done. But in terms of scale, in terms of speed, in terms of volume, we just happen to have the most people on the planet with the most technology and the smallest group of individuals that have the broadest swath of power, I think,
Right.
that have been able to manipulate and configure a scenario. And the reason why I'm, really interested, and I'm very curious to see what this conversation reveals, but your expertise in systems. Because
Yes.
my whole point is you have to understand systems. You have to
A
understand
hundred percent.
systems to even have a baseline paradigmatic sort of vision to be able to conceptualize what it is the subject matter. So,
Right. Yes.
starting there, I just want to start the conversation from this perspective, and then I'll give you a chance to ramp up sort of your come
For
from, your
sure.
expertise, and the long road that got you to where you are. But you have been very critical of the people that I show with the new Untouchables that are the most um, credible
Oh
attorneys
yeah.
that I have come across, meaning former prosecutors at the highest level at the Department of
Right.
Justice, the FBI, the Securities and Exchange Commission, AGs, and so on and so forth, that are dealing with cases that involve literally billions of dollars, if not trillions, and hundreds of millions of people in the sort of direct carnage of this whole scenario, right? The
Hmm.
gateways to certain things that fill over the course of the last 3 years. But you continually tell us in the comment section that I discover that they're not telling us the whole story. So let's start there. Where do you think? Why don't you walk me through what you think I
Yes.
need to know because you've watched this whole thing?
Right. So first, let me say the people that you have on are brilliant. They are spot on within the domain of legal. Legal is not the whole system. The
Okay.
whole system must include the common law, which is not legal in any way, shape, or form.
Going back to what
Everything,
are we talking about? The common law that goes back to what the what am I talking about in England in 1412 by way of the Magna Carta? Is that what we're talking about?
yes,
Okay.
yes, and the common law is real. Okay, when we start talking about legal, it's a very interesting shift in the conversation because, and you can ask any attorney this, including the new untouchables, which is, and this is something that attorneys don't like to say because they don't want people to know this, is that, and here's the quote: everything legal is fiction, and because everything legal is fiction, you can't give as much credibility to it, right? Like if just like a science fiction book, right?
Sure.
It's not real. Everything legal isn't necessarily real. And a good way to document this is under the legal term color of law. Now, keep in mind that legal terms, they have their own dictionary. And it's, Black's legal dictionary is very interesting. I've read it. I've read it actually, not the whole thing. I mean, I've read sections of it, but legalese is not English and English is not legalese. They look the same, but attorneys are not going to tell us that the words that they use are not the ones in English. They have legal definitions. And because they have these different sets of definitions, which have to be defined, like you actually have to specify the words, like this is what this actually means. And usually it comes from a court case, not from English. Like a really good example might be a person, right? We think of a person, that's you, that's me. But in the legal realm, the term person is not necessarily the what we think that it is, right? A person is actually our legal identity. Okay, a legal identity is like a Harry Potter character versus Daniel Radcliffe from Harry Potter, right? You've got Harry Potter, the character, which is not real. It is a fiction. He is a fiction, but he is still a man. He's still a human being, right? But within the fiction. And then you also have Daniel Radcliffe. And to confuse the legal identity as a person with the real man at the common law, that's one of the things that attorneys love to do that they do not tell us that they're actually doing, right? They're confusing, they're conflating these different ideas about how the fiction and your legal identity as a representation of you within the system is you. And it's kind of like confusing a Monopoly game piece with the player, right? Do you identify as a Monopoly game piece when you play Monopoly? Like, do you identify the other players as the game piece,
No.
right? Not, no, no, we don't. Like that's a part of the issue, right? Is
Yeah.
that we want to separate legal from reality. And the way that I have been
Hey,
able
before you
to,
go on to the next level, let me just kind of respond to something you just said. So,
yeah,
obviously, I'm not an expert in the law. I've been around lawyers and have been around the law based on a specific come from to where I conceptually understand different aspects of what could be legalese, the jargon, and it is a slippery
mhm,
slope, and
it
definitions
is.
don't necessarily mean the same thing. And we see that play out all the time in the intent and the judgment and yada yada yada. It's simply tricky, right? And I've
Yes.
I've always kind of come from the more that I understand, it's the nature of we give the power of the law to the people who write the laws, and
Yes.
there's a whole systematic approach to that. But those laws can change, of course, as we've seen play out. And
Mhm.
yet, I think a lot of them go against the grain of the nature of our history, the nature of our ideals, the nature of what we believe are certain things, but then can
Common sense.
right, it can easily be conjured into a different scenario. But
Yes.
specifically of the legal fiction, as you described, as it relates for me to Citizens United and corporations, are the legal fiction. Go ahead.
Yes. And that's actually the next thing I wanted to bring up, which is the reason why Citizens United is so important. And there's a couple of different aspects that I wanted to bring up about Citizens United. It's important for two reasons. One, our legal identity is actually a corporation. Okay, we can
As
look
a
up
country.
as a country, our United States itself is a corporation. Okay. Now, when we got started, the United States was not a corporation. Okay. They started as a constitutional republic, but somewhere along the line, and we can get into that, which is a very interesting history, and it goes back 150 years. It became a corporation, and we are now actually living under a United States federal government corporation that is not actually a constitutional republic. A lot of people think that it is a constitutional republic, and there is actually a difference between a federal government and a national government. Okay,
Okay.
we're under a federal government, and we keep thinking it's a national government. And the difference between the two is a federal government is something that operates out of Washington, D.C. A national government is one that is made by the actual people. Okay. The second reason why Citizens United is well, it's important because the United States, being a corporation, cannot sue or be sued without it being a corporation as a person. Right. And that's the reason why Citizens United is so important. And it's not just Citizens United. It goes back to the court case of, I've got it right here. It's the Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad in 1886.
Right. That
They
was
decided,
I'm familiar with that.
right? And the reason why that is so important was because the United States cannot sue or be sued or act as a person, if you will, without being itself a corporation. At least that's how it has become. Now, the reason why it's important under this legal identity is your game piece in like a monopoly game piece in the legal system is because your game piece itself is actually a corporation. Okay. And we know that it's a corporation. And that's how it has personhood within the system. It doesn't have personhood by our own virtue. We are persons, but more specifically within the legalese, we are what is considered natural persons. And even that is a legal term. So we are common law men and women, leaving out the whole term person, right? And I think that's incredibly important because if your game piece was not a corporation, then it also wouldn't be able to sue or be sued. Okay. Now, I can point you directly to the law that tells us
Well, wait,
that.
can I ask you a couple of questions before
Sure.
we get into that aspect of it? So, because I just want to kind of get my terminology down and I'm trying to register it based on the history that I understand within the context of this slippery verbiage, right?
Mhm.
So, common law, I understand, was really the kind of purpose driven decision maker behind, I don't know, let's call it, if we're talking 1400 years, I mean, excuse me, 1400, we're talking about 500 years plus of
Mhm.
sort of tradition to where a lot of the stuff wasn't written and it was just basically built on the the royalty or the monarchy or the landholders of the time with specific sorts of outcomes that were just
Yes.
accepted, right? Through the
Right.
whole nature of, you know, uh, uh, I was about to say suffrage, but that is definitely part of it. But it's when you live off the land and you use that as your ability to raise your family, but you do so at the discretion of the landholder, sort of thing, right? So
Yes.
there's all this history embedded in our legal code, but I also know that there's a lot of specificity that is completely evolved from the common law, but I did run into a lot of stuff in the immediate aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis, particularly as it related to the Bar Association. because
Oh, yes.
because a lot of the people were always enamored with this notion that attorneys were in the United States sort of under the thumb of the common law, right? Of a UK sort of principle that was over and above the commonality. That was their come from. That's what they would say. Now,
Yes.
I've never talked to the former director of prosecutions from the Department of Justice about this, nor have I talked to former Yale professors in law and everything about this. So that's about as far as it gets. But I also just want to construct this as you move into the next scenario, right? Because it's kind of
Mhm.
like precedent on top of precedent on top of precedent, what ultimately has the final arbiter of whatever the conflict resolution is, right? And so when
Yes.
you're talking about a corporation, particularly in the late 1800s, right? We're talking about the railroads and all of the power that they may have manifested. And you said it was a San Jose, was it the city of San Jose?
It was the Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad that
Santa Clara.
granted, yeah, Santa Clara County.
Okay, and regardless of all the absolute details, I'm just trying to think of the players
Right.
here, right? I'm thinking of a county and a state that has its certain jurisdiction, but yet that's going to, in this particular case, I think, have to be subservient, if that's the right kind of connotation, to a corporation's further what's the word I'm looking for? Dominance, I guess. Dominance
Right.
in a particular outcome based on what I guess is what you're referring to as common law. Now, obviously, I don't know all the specifics and details, but roughly, is that kind of the intent of what you're sharing with me?
This is one of what yes, this is one of the roads to go down.
Okay. All
And
right, please
one
continue.
of the one of the words that I wanted, okay, so I'll get to the Santa Clara court case in just a second, but I wanted to clarify this whole idea of common law versus legal fiction.
Sure.
Okay. The term that you can look up in Black's Law Dictionary is called color of law. Okay. Now, if you look up and you delve deep into that term, color of law, you'll see that everything that the United States government and any government in the world does, because of the United Nations, by the way, the reason why everything that they do is under color of law. Okay. And so, of course, the question is if everything that the United States does is authorized by color of law, what is it? What is color of law? How does it work? And the definition of color of law that they have is appearance without substance. Okay. And I think that's a critical definition because
Sure.
it
This
means
reminds me of
there's
what I learned in business a long time ago. All these assholes say perception is reality, but please continue.
that's exactly right. They have perception, but no actuality behind anything that they do, which I find to be completely ridiculous. And that is actually what provides for the fraud. It provides for the transfer of the funds. It provides that we can look at the United States as not necessarily a corporation, but as we can conflate the idea of a federal government with a national government because it's all fiction, right? It's just whatever the attorneys want to tell us it is. Right now, that's not to say that attorneys are lying to us. I think that a lot of attorneys, they're either omitting, they don't know the truth, or they do know some of these things and they don't see the relevancy of it. And I have definitely found attorneys that know the facts and are not telling us the truth. Okay. One of them was the general counsel for the Secretary of State of Michigan. I had a conversation with him at one point where I was asking him, what is the little red number at the corner of birth certificates and vehicle titles? And he just kept telling me it's an inventory control number. His name is William Cordenbrock, by the way. He's no longer with them. But I kept asking him, well, is it anything more? And he said, no, it's an inventory control number. And I go, is it more that, yeah, but well, you're not answering my questions. What else does it do? It's an inventory control number. Can you just tell me, like, be honest right here? Like, there's something really, really wrong here when he can't tell me the actual truth about what law is and what they're doing from the government side. Now, the government attorneys are the ones that are, let's just call them liars, lawyers, liars, right? So color of law is really interesting because it also specifies that there is a different aspect of law that does have substance. Okay, so there is one side of the law that is appearance without substance, and that's color of law, that's legal. And then there is appearance with substance, which to me is common law.
Oh, interesting.
Okay. So
Because
that's where,
I would think of it as just the opposite, just based on the whole span of kind of just what is the terminology I'm looking for? It's just generalities, right? I mean, the
right,
specificity. Okay, go ahead.
right. Well, this is what's so interesting about legal, which is that everything legal being a fiction is like an inversion of reality, right? Like, for instance, the term person, right? We think of ourselves as persons, but we're not persons. We're natural human beings, Homo sapiens. And there is a legal term for what your game piece is, which is a Homo legalis. So they've actually made it scientific to look at the game piece as if it were a legal human. That's the term, Homo legalis. Just like Harry Potter is a fiction, right? Doesn't exist, still a man, still a human being, Homo sapien, fictitious, right? And that's outrageously confusing to a lot of people because they don't have that level of abstraction,
Sure.
right?
Well,
So
let's
you've
get
got
into
your
the application of it then. Give me an application of how those two things might work within the law,
so
or lack
well,
thereof.
a part of it is that everything that the when we look at the courtroom, okay, they take our legal person to court. Okay, and we know that this is true. They don't take us to court, they take the legal person to court, and the legal person is what is subject to state and federal laws. And the reason why is because we are sovereigns, right? And this is one of the things that I think is really critical, which is that there is no such thing as a sovereign citizen. You can't be sovereign and a citizen at the same time. They're mutually exclusive, polar opposite things. You can't use the term sovereign citizen for oneself or even against someone else,
That's funny.
right?
I got to be honest with you because I've met some of the sovereign citizens, but I think that's a funny kind of unpacking of what always seemed to be contradictory. But please continue.
It is. It's supposed to be a contradiction, and in fact, there's no actual definition. There's no legal definition of the term sovereign citizen. So it's just literally hearsay upon hearsay upon hearsay. So people that call themselves sovereign citizens, they haven't thought this through like at all, right? So, and I think of them not necessarily as idiots, but on the right path. They're getting there, right? And I don't judge them, but I like to tell them, hey, look, you're off. I'm not judging you, but you're off. And usually people go, oh, what are you? Oh, I'm going to take all kinds of offense to that. And it's like, no. That's not. Don't take offense. A lot of the things that I say, people do take offense to because it conflicts. There's like a lot of cognitive dissonance, and I think that was actually one of the
Well,
things.
the sovereign citizens that I've met are uber libertarian, and they get themselves completely wrapped into a puddle of
Yes.
confusion. But again, those are the ones that I was hearing from the time in California. Now that I think about it, they kept referring to the Bar Association as being controlled by, basically the Magna Carta, I guess.
The whole idea of the Magna Carta is really interesting. The Magna Carta is what started the City of London.
Right.
Okay. And the City of London is where there are four guilds of attorneys, okay, which is where the whole attorney thing comes from. And that's also the reason why you have this idea that attorneys operate under the common law is because they're actually, they come from that, right? They come from the British City of London attorney guilds. Okay. And there's a couple of them. Some of them are for us, some of them are for businesses. And believe it or not, in the Black's Legal Dictionary, they actually talk about the guilds. There's actually definitions of the guilds in Black's Law Dictionary, which is like, but it's American. How is that even a thing, right?
When was that
So
dictionary written? Do you know, or excuse me, published? I guess.
there's where I think it's version 11, edition 11 at this point, but it got started quite a long time ago.
Okay.
I think it was like the 1896, I think was the first edition. And they release editions every 10 to 15 years. There's a couple
Okay.
of times where it's a little longer, a couple of times a little shorter. But there's a lot of very interesting things that you can find in there in Black's Law Dictionary, like color of law, like person. There's like dozens of different definitions of the term person, by the way. Okay. One of the more interesting ones that I've heard the new Untouchables and yourself talk about is rule of law, right? The definition of rule of law is the subjugation of citizens under statute, which is the reason why we don't have rights. We don't actually have recognized natural rights. Now we have legal rights, but a part of the thing is you look up the definition of right in Black's Law Dictionary, and what it says is it's a privilege, which makes all the sense in the world when you start thinking, well, they can revoke anything that any of these rights that they give us. Well, because they're calling a right, they're calling a privilege a right,
All right,
and
but
it's not.
the first thing that pops in my head, given, and this is probably far afield from where we need to go with this dialogue, but yeah, but doesn't the law or the rule of law also maintain an execution for anyone with any variance of power? I mean, that's the
Yes,
idea. Okay.
that yes, it's supposed to give power to the powerful people. It's to the attorneys, to the elite, to the bankers
Who are who's
have all these
executing the
rights.
law, quite frankly, though, right? So if there was a law, like in the case of Watergate or in the case of, I mean, we could probably go through a litany of Supreme Court decisions, but there's different times where it goes towards the elite, and there's different times where it imbues towards, a populist movement, so to speak, right? It just depends on.
Usually, it only moves towards the populace when it's so obvious that it can't move towards the elite,
Well, I would say that
right?
was I would say that with what just happened with the presidential immunity, but that well, I guess we'll
Yes,
get that downstream. But please,
yes.
I
Okay,
don't
so
want to.
let's
Yeah, you go ahead and you walk me through this.
all right. So so you're talking about court cases going in different directions, and I think this is a perfect jumping off point for Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad, which of course informed the whole Citizens United thing. Okay, now this is where Thomas Hart, he was the one that really got me interested in, he was the one that informed me about this when I was doing research on this, which is how do corporations have personhood? Okay. Now the Santa Clara County versus Southern Pacific Railroad, that court case, and this is going to blow your mind. Okay, never actually ruled that corporations have personhood.
Oh
It
wow.
was it was a scam. The railroads paid off the clerk to change the head note to say that they did. And ever since then, every single courtroom, every single judge, every single attorney has actually ruled in favor of corporations being persons, which
Wow.
means
That
which
you can't be
means
the only
that
person who knows that.
no, I'm not. Thomas Hart knows that too. And he has a video from the Young Turks. It was about 10 or 11 years ago now, where he discusses that this court case is fraudulent from the get-go, which means that we can't actually reverse Citizens United, right? Because it wasn't actually ruled properly, right? It was ruled
Well,
upon
sure.
corporations actually having personhood, which they don't have.
Wow.
Okay. So
I'm going to look into
it,
that, but
we
okay.
we don't actually need to reverse Citizens United. What we need to do is tell the judges that they need to start ruling in the proper way, like that. We know that it's a fraud. Okay, so which to me that's all that like I said, it's an inversion, right? It's a complete and total inversion of what actually is. Go read the court case.
Okay.
Go. It's not a long court case. Santa Clara County versus Southern
I
Pacific
wouldn't
Railroad.
doubt it based on a lot of what I've seen, but the perversion, inversion of what you're talking about, it just seems like with subsequent cases that because they all build on the precedent of before that the
That's
attorneys would
exactly
have
right.
the ability to be able to discern that to where that would become
That's right.
neutral and then would have it thrown out. I mean, that's the idea. I would
Right. Right. So every single banker that has stolen the money, they say, well, you see, we have corporate immunity, right? Like I'm in a corporation. You can't hold me accountable.
think.
Hold the corporation accountable. They're the person that we went through to steal all of this money from the American public,
Yeah.
right? The problem is that because of the fact that Citizens United is an inversion, and that this court case isn't to actually it didn't rule that corporations have personhood,
Yeah.
we can technically right now go after the CEOs, the presidents, the CFOs, everyone individually
Sure. But
because they don't have that
let me give you a
protection.
caveat to that too, though, not to blow it, because I think it's interesting, and I'm buying it so far in terms of, and I'm looking at how far we'll be able to get into this. But look, it's also true that during the savings and loan era and during aspects of Enron and WorldCom and other corporate malfeasance that did use conspiratorial scenarios, that there's all sorts of different methodologies and remedies for the actual criminality that
Yes.
can be and has been lay down to where your composite argument there that because they tend to hide behind corporations and LLCs and all of these other
Yes.
methodologies of obfuscation. What ultimately comes down the pike and what the Clean New Deal and everything I've done in my work reveals is that no, it was a decision based on the powers that be within the Department of Justice and the Securities and Exchange Commission and so forth that chose not to do the investigations that would
Right.
elicit these things that were criminal where they couldn't avoid it, right? To your point.
Right.
And that happens all the time. And that's what the Supreme Court has created this juggernaut with, the 14th Amendment, Section 3. But the key to all of this is if you do the investigations, that there are remedies. Are you suggesting, because I think this is what I feel from you and some of the comments that you've had, and maybe I'm getting a little bit further than you anticipated with this, but if you're saying that CEOs can't be held accountable because they can hide behind LLCs and some of these
The
other
corporate
elements,
veil.
we know for a fact that they can, but you have to elicit the evidence and you've got to switch the whistleblowers and you've got to make the
Right.
right cases. Anyway, please continue.
So even if we can find the evidence in the cases, they're not going to investigate the banks. One of the reasons why is because statutes permits them to do a lot of this gray area type stuff, and they're hiding in that gray area by whitewashing.
Well, true.
They are also because a part of it also there's two aspects. One is taxpayer money, but the other is the reason why they don't want to investigate the banks, in my view, is because there is the biggest secret that the attorneys are not telling us, which is that every single mortgage is fraud. Not a
It
single
is.
mortgage has consideration. Consideration is required for a contract to be valid. Okay. Now,
True.
what I mean by consideration, just because I'm sure you know what consideration is, but for everyone that's listening, what consideration is both sides of a contract have to have equal skin in the game.
Right.
Okay. So if you are putting up your house, the bank actually has to put up an equal value to the house, like the money. And the thing is that the money that they're actually giving in a mortgage, they don't have.
Yeah. Or they create out of thin air. That's another story. But
They
yes.
create, well, here's the thing. It's not just that they create it out of thin air. The thing that the banks are bringing to a mortgage is the ability to create money out of thin air.
Sure.
The money for your mortgage is actually created by your signature after you've signed it. Now, I
That's
know that
true.
there is this idea of you underwrite it before you sign the mortgage, but the problem is if you don't sign the mortgage, like if you just go, oh, screw
Well,
this,
I've
I'm
heard this
out.
from the beginning. I've heard this from the beginning, especially when you understand the confluence of what the fraud elicited downstream, that you should
Yes,
be actually participating in as a revenue, playing a role in that revenue. That's what people were
right.
arguing back in the after the 2008 great financial crisis. But the one thing I'm a little bit hesitant to bridge again, it's about the investigation. So in
Yes,
our work, the con, we spent a lot of money to go the distance to get the evidence and the whistleblowing and all of the
right.
elements to put together all of the pieces that would elicit what I'm telling you is we did, and you know this because I believe you've seen the con. I think you've mentioned that
I have.
before.
And it's a brilliant documentary. Everyone should
Thank
go
you.
watch it.
Thank you very much. And
Thecon.tv.
you can see that at the con.tv, but it's what the federal government didn't do that we
Right,
did that literally was the largest racketeering enterprise in the history of
right.
the world by volume. Okay. So, anyway, please continue.
But that's also the reason why they didn't want to actually go after the banks. It's not that just that they were too big to fail. It would expose that every mortgage is fraud. Every loan is fraud. And we can't have that because everything would break. Everything would collapse. And well, this is an argument for sound money, right? Gold and silver and other resources backing the value of the money. And of course, this is where we see BRICS starting to go that path and China taking all of the gold and Russia is starting to think about that. Now I'm going to leave Russia on the wayside. That's a whole different conversation. So I think I want to switch courses a little bit because that entire fraud of what happened in the 2008 crisis basically happened because the United States itself is the corporation. It's a federal government, not a national government. And I think that that distinction makes all the difference in the world. And again, this goes back to the common law. And by the way, all of the people who were screwed over by the banks in the 2008 crisis. Let me give you the qualification of what common law, how common law works. Okay, we know that legal works on statutes, and there's like millions of words and statutes, and all these different things. And no one, first, that's really contradictory. So there's things in law that contradicts itself, and because it contradicts itself, you can't really take it that seriously, right? Like, because if it contradicts itself, then you can have it both ways. There's people who will be, the robber barons can get away with this. And then, but also the people who get screwed can also, get their remedy as well, right? So because of the fact that law is so contradictory, now there's a book I recommend that people go read. It's called Three Felonies a Day. Okay. And Three Felonies a Day is a very interesting book because it talks about how the average American commits, literally, no joke, three felonies every single day just because the law is so loosey-goosey, so ill-informed, and so contradictory. Okay. And I read that book, absolutely brilliant. And I think it does actually apply. I mean, it had very specific instances, not necessarily for us as like individuals per se. Again, another legal term, individual. That's a whole nother conversation. But common law is, what's so interesting about common law is that there's really four aspects to it. Okay. One is don't hurt people. Two, don't hurt their stuff. Three, abide by your contracts. And four, if you are damaged, you have the right to remedy. Those are the only four principles of common law. Now you can say, okay, well, how does legal intersect with that? Again, systems perspective, right? How does legal interface with common law? Common law is where we start. When you're born, you're at the common law. The birth certificate creates your legal person, your legal game piece. Your birth certificate is not for you, it's for your game piece. Okay, which I find to be very interesting. And this is what's really messed up. I spoke with the California Vital Records people, and I got on the line and I was asking how to, I want to get a birth certificate without a barcode. And they said, okay, well, we're going to have to put you on with the banknote specialist at Vital Records.
Boy, and now you're going into places of people that I've heard from the very beginning, that the second you're born, you're thrown into the Federal Reserve through the, okay.
Yes, and that's exactly right. That's exactly right. And the banknote specialist, and I quote, the birth certificate, it would not be a banknote without the barcode. That's what she said.
Go ahead.
That's what she said. And when I put it together, a banknote is technically falls under Uniform Commercial Code Article 3 as a negotiable instrument.
Right.
Okay. And everything that
wait a second. The birth certificate falls under the UCC code. Is that what you just
said? Yes. That's exactly right.
Tell me how you discovered that and what's the connection.
So a banknote is a negotiable instrument.
Yeah.
Okay, you can't have
banknotes, and I know all about UCC number 3. I'm trying to connect it to the birth certificate.
So if you look at UCC 3 and you say what is necessary for something to be a negotiable instrument, everything on the birth certificate is literally fits that definition. Okay, a UCC negotiable instrument is a format. It's not a thing, it's a format. And if you follow the format, it's a negotiable instrument, and all negotiable instruments can technically be converted into debt.
Right. I know that part.
Okay. And there's the Shepard-Towner Act, which has been superseded, by the way, but you can, for you and your audience, you can look into this. The Shepard-Towner Act monetized birth certificates for $650,000 in like 1913, 1918, give or take in there. So your birth certificate 100 years ago.
So you're saying the creation of the Federal Reserve created a $650,000 convertible note on your birth certificate at $650,000 in 1913.
Yes.
So the idea is that when you're born, you're going to be available to be loaned up to $650,000 based on that sort of
maternity hygiene. It was to protect the mother. It's insurance.
Oh, no shit.
Yes. It's the Shepard-Towner Maternity Hygiene Act.
Okay, got it. So that would come from the federal government to backstop the insure the hospital given any sort of complication.
You're exactly right. So now we're talking medical, which is, that's a whole nother, they're doing so much fraud to us. Now, of course, Who gets that money? Well, I know who gets that money. The Federal Reserve. Okay, because your birth certificate, after it's recorded after in the state registrar, your birth certificate is sold to the federal government, and it goes through multiple institutions at the federal government. Okay, so it's sold to, there's multiple people. It's sold to the Department of Commerce. It's sold to the Department of Transportation. It's sold to the U.S. Treasury. I'm pretty sure it goes to the Department of Justice. I'm pretty sure it goes
What
through
is it in this
the
case? What is it?
the birth certificate. It's
Oh,
sold.
so it's multi-pledged, is what you're saying?
It's rehypothecated, is that term.
Rehypothecated. I remember
Okay, it's
that.
rehypothecated. So a hypothecation is where you sell
And
an
what's your
asset.
evidence of this?
The evidence that I have of this is it actually comes from the what is it called?
By the way, I've
The
heard this
draft.
before. I've heard stuff like this, but I never saw the
Right.
evidence. But please continue.
So selective service systems. Okay, when you look at what the selective service systems does, which I mean, that's a whole nother. I mean, now we're going back to the United States being a corporation for the Civil War. The Civil War never actually ended. And I think that's a really big deal. Okay. Now, the reason why I mean, I can read for you the approximate, I have it right here. The National Park Service, Appomattox Courthouse frequently asked questions. They have, well, okay, so that's how we know that the Civil War never ended, is they said so. But okay, to answer your question about the birth certificate, what's so fascinating about the birth certificate going through these different institutions is the people who the selective service points to as what this affects. So if you, for all of the men who have to be registered for the draft, it gets who we are. Our identity is affected by that. And you can actually see in their own documentation that these are some of the institutions who get access to our birth certificate as an asset.
So I buy all of that, but there's questions that I push back on. But the first question
Yes.
I got to push back on: Robert Lee signed surrender. That's the end of the Civil War.
Okay, and you're right. But I'll read this real quick.
So there's some
Okay.
technical legalese that says that it never ended because of criteria that maybe I'm not aware of, right? Is that kind of
Okay.
the idea?
Here is from the government website, nps.gov/apco/faqs.htm. Okay. Quote, where was the treaty signed? There was no treaty signed to end the Civil War. The surrender at Appomattox Courthouse was a military surrender of an army which was surrounded. The Confederate government never surrendered, and had it wanted to, the United States government would likely have not accepted. To do so would have legally acknowledged the existence of the Confederate States of America and would have legitimized it and given it certain legal status internationally. Treaties between two nations and the U.S. could never concede the legal existence of the Confederacy, even though it had a government, army, taxes, and all the other trappings of a modern government.
Right. If I spoke to a Civil War expert, I'm sure they would have something to say about that. But let's continue because
Well,
so
that's the government. That's a government website
let me
saying.
back up though
Yeah, yeah.
because I know that you've talked. Okay, some of the big elements that you've introduced so far: legal fiction, personhood versus corporations in the legal fiction there, and common law, obviously nationhood versus federal. What was the terminology?
Federal government versus national
Oh, you
government.
just said federal government versus national government and the
Yes.
distinction therein. And then ultimately, then we dovetail into the birth certificate being through the UCC
Three.
three, which I understand the conveyor belt and how everything is dead as a negotiable instrument because that became a huge scenario in the what I call the foreclosure mills and all of the illegal
Yeah.
foreclosures that took place.
Yeah.
Even though they said because nobody could fucking follow the debt. Nobody could prove who owned the debt. That was the biggest
Right.
problem. And I've been
Right.
inside the registry of deeds in two locations. One in I'm trying to think of the name of the town in North Carolina, and the other one was, of course, the oldest registry of deeds in the United States, which is in Massachusetts, and the name of the town will come to me. But you know, look, millions of homes were foreclosed upon without standing.
Hmm. Yes.
And in fact, many years later, this is how fucking ridiculous this, pardon my language, but the douchebags that were in the midst of creating the elements that led to this whole thing, including Newt Gingrich and then later a potpourri of Fox News analysts, who I know has been involved with a lot of the stuff. What's his name? Hannity. He's got
Yeah.
real estate all over the place that he picked up on the cheap because of a bunch of crap. And then because of what I'm talking about. And it's just amazing how these guys are dialed into this. But Rudolph Giuliani was involved. And then there were several others. But the bottom line is they created this unbelievably stupid title lock program that they've been selling for the last 5 years. But the registry of deeds around the country offer this for free anyway. But what they're saying is what I'm saying is that, and so instead of going to the FBI and the DOJ and taking it to Congress and everything else, they decided to make some money on being able to sell people, that your house can be stolen. But
Yes.
your house can be stolen because nobody's enforcing the law. Nobody's enforcing the UCC code 3 because they're like, oh yeah, this guy's got your
Boom,
debt.
boom, boom. Right.
Okay, so there's some legitimacy to what you're saying, but the thing that I've heard about, and I don't want to get too deep into this because
Deep
I'm
into it.
going
Yeah.
back into like years ago when people were trying to suss this out, because a lot of these people went and they were sovereign citizens. Okay, the
Right.
people were telling me were sovereign citizens. They were from California and they got super dialed in because a lot of what they understood was true, right? What we're talking about with the UCC
Right.
code and the illegal foreclosures and
Yes.
everything else. But then they dovetail it and they said that the reason this all happened was it was manifested because the powers that be understood they could do this and get away with it based on what you just said, based on the birth certificate. And then
Right.
they go into
So
this trillions and trillions and trillions, and then they could do all sorts of forensics, and it got out of fucking control, is what it got into.
right.
Go ahead.
So I want to mention the book. It's like a pamphlet. It's called the UCC Connection. Okay. It's a little book. It's not big. It's not long. It's very interesting, and it documents a lot of the corruption that we've been through, and it goes back a long time. And this is where we can say that the United States itself actually has creditors. I mean, if the United States is a corporation, then it has owners,
Sure.
right? If it is a constitutional republic, it doesn't have the owners are the people. Okay.
I
If,
buy
if
that.
it's a constant, right? But the problem is when the United States was converted into a corporation, it had creditors. Now the banks, I'm sorry, the courtrooms are actually in the pocket of the creditors. Okay, if you
Of
will,
course they are.
every courtroom is a
I know
bankruptcy
that for a
courtroom,
fact.
right? The United States went bankrupt. Okay, 1933. Okay, which is also, by the way, one of the aspects. So it's not just that the United States is a corporation.
Wait a second. Wait a second. Wait a second.
Yeah,
We went bankrupt in 1933. I don't think that's accurate because, first of all, I've never seen that. You'd have to demonstrate that to me. Nobody,
right, right, yes.
no, but what I know, what happened in 1933 is we created the Securities and Exchange Commission based on Glass-Steagall, based on the Security and Exchange
Yes.
Act of
Yes,
1933.
that was the big banking crisis.
Because of everything that happened, through 1929 that created the global depression.
Yes.
But then they created
Yes.
Federal Reserve Act 13.3 to create the exigent lending mega
Yes.
merger between private interests and the government to create and secure, creating a float, if you will, following.
Right.
But they did say in the caveat, and I know the statutes because this is my entire argument, is that it says you cannot use the exigent lending capacity of the Federal Reserve / full faith and credit of the United States for commodities trading, particularly
Right.
in real estate. That's in the fucking statutes. Please
Yes.
continue.
So in 1933, there was a really interesting event that happened. They confiscated gold.
In
Okay.
33, yeah.
1933. That was like the national bank. That was when they had the national emergency.
Yeah.
Okay. And
That's
they
true.
started
That's true because it was under FDR. Yeah, that's right.
right. It was under FDR. And this is one of the reasons why I've been banging on about Senate Report 93549. Okay, which is the continuing national emergencies. I've heard you and the New Untouchables talk about how oh, Donald Trump is the national the emergency president, and it's like, well, we've been under national emergencies since 1933, not just one, multiple. Okay, and I actually have the report right here.
Wait a second. When have
Um,
you heard the new Untouchables say that Donald Trump is a national emergency president?
there was one instance where they were talking about how he Donald Trump is basically doing the things that he's doing under the quote unquote national emergency.
Oh,
Like,
I
for
see what you're saying,
instance,
because that would have impacted what the Supreme Court had to say, and this were the technocrats of the.
that's right.
Okay,
That's right. That's right. Okay, so I want to read for you
oh,
this
and that
very
goes to the Doge, by the way. Yeah,
oh, absolutely,
yeah, yeah.
absolutely. So this is Senate Report 93549, and I'm going to read two little sections of it. One, a majority. This is in the introduction. A majority of the people of the United States have lived all their lives under emergency rule. For 40 years, freedoms and governmental procedures guaranteed by the Constitution have, in varying degrees, been abridged by laws brought into force by the states of national emergency. Okay, that was the first part. And I think that's, I mean, this is really informative for me, at least. Okay, the second part is in the foreword. And I'll put it like this, quote, since March 9th, 1933, the United States has been in a state of declared national emergency. Goes on. These hundred of statutes delegate to the president extraordinary power ordinarily exercised by the Congress, which affect the lives of American citizens in a host of all-encompassing manners.
Okay, so let's think about 1933. You're coming out of the Great Depression. There is to be argued, and I guess Congress could have gone along with it, given what I just said, of a national emergency. And I know you've quoted the Civil War that we're going to have to get into, but and it'd be ironic, but I think it would actually bear uh, truth from the standpoint that I know that a lot of the arguments that these Project 2025, theories in the executive, or sorry, in the unitary presidency, or the what do they call it, the imperial presidency, whatever the fuck,
Yeah.
that it's predicated on these emergency powers, right? And so the
Yes.
Republicans
Yes.
are just saying, at least through this MAGA apocalypse and all of the other stuff, that that's what they use to justify the scenario.
Right.
So
And so this is the reason why they're doing that, which explains a lot, actually. And now this is where it gets really bizarre, because they released that report in 1976. Okay. Now they gave 2 years to the Congress to write an act to reverse all of the national emergencies, and they did. They reversed all of the national emergencies, but they said, we are going to allow the United States to continue acting under national emergencies for 2 years, a grace period of 2 years. And so from 1976 to 1978 was the time period where they had the act, but they didn't continue because it was under the grace period of the national emergencies. The problem is every single attorney since 1978 has renewed by executive order every September, give or take a few weeks here and there, renewed the national emergencies under Cuba. And I can show you where in law that is. I think it's 50 United States Code section.
Cuba as in the country Cuba?
Yes, yes. Because, and I mean, this is the reason why they need Cuba to be under a dictatorship. Actually, it's ironic, but like they kind of
My
need.
mind first went to Guantanamo for some reason, but
And that's actually the reason why Guantanamo is there. Actually, is because that is a declared enemy of the United States.
Right.
Okay, and so under these executive orders, so it's not just Trump. Okay, it's Biden, It's Trump 1. It's Obama. It's Bush 2. It's Clinton. It's Bush 1. It's Reagan. I mean, it goes on, right?
The emergency powers gives the president this executive privilege that is basically the imperial president under all of them.
Yes.
Because you could go
Yes.
back and you could argue
Exactly.
like the unconstitutionally of waging war, bombing Iran, like we,
Yes. That's
all of those
exact. And
other
this is
elements
the
that they've
reason
all been
why.
guilty of for like the last 40 years.
Yes, and this is the reason why. And so it's not just Trump. Trump is a big
Sure,
problem, and
they've all been waging war in one wage or another.
exactly, exactly. And it's terrible. It's absolutely ridiculous the fact that they and so it's Title 50 United States Code Section 4503. And if you go to Cornell Law and you type in you go to Cornell Law and you hit there's a tab for notes and you scroll to the bottom, you can actually see all of the executive orders dating back to 1978 that continue these national emergencies, plural, that allow the United States to do what it's doing with war and allows the United States unitary executive to do and basically acts unilaterally outside of Congress, outside of the judiciary, outside of all of these things. Now, and which that to me that explains a lot.
Okay, but the thing is, I know that there is a lot of, let's say, resistance attorneys that would be deeply committed to fighting that, and obviously they'd be knowledgeable to know about it. So how come they can't defeat it? What do you get, 2/3 in Congress to be able to overturn it or something to that effect?
Executive orders.
So it has
You
to come
can't.
from the executive president to stop. Congress can't stop the emergency.
Congress cannot. Well, I mean, the judiciary can basically like wayside executive orders for a little bit, but like it's very difficult to actually address an executive order because it's executive, right?
Right.
Like,
I mean, just technically, there's something that I know that we may be missing. But okay, but let's go back.
No, I agree with you. I agree with you. And there are things I don't know
These
as well.
attorneys,
So,
these guys are freaking geniuses, and they fight every single thing that there is. And I
right.
always, when I try to follow them, it's like I mean, it's just a freaking monumental
Yeah.
manuscript and endeavoring that these guys are capable of to be able to find all of these different ways to maneuver, and they get paid to do it heavily by certain foundations and so forth. So, but yet I understand that. Look, just conceptually, I want to know where we're going in the conversation, because let's go back
Yeah.
to the very beginning of this conversation, right? The
Yeah.
new untouchables are guys that have demonstrated over decades of work utilizing the forensics, utilizing the theories,
Yes.
utilizing the legal code, utilizing all of the aspects of the federal government and specific mandates to do what no other country in the history of the world's ever done, specifically as it relates to whistleblowers. We have
Yes.
a certain sort of, I don't know, either it's a national consciousness, to your original point, I think it was. No, that's what you studied, by the way. It was,
Yeah. Information systems, consciousness.
yeah, okay.
Yes.
Right.
Computers.
We
Law.
have this tendency of anti-authoritarian and anti-wrong, and people of great character come through time and time and time again. And what we've seen in the Trump administration, more so, even though it's been ongoing since Obama in a major way, you're a whistleblower now, chances are they're going to destroy you immediately.
Yes.
Like that. Okay.
Right.
So
Right.
that's the system saying, okay, we are lawless. To your point, we've always been lawless, but you've had these criticisms that these guys aren't telling the truth, the whole truth, and nothing but the truth. And I take exception to it, because I'm thinking to myself,
Yeah.
okay, on what accord? Based on what do we say? Not San Jose, or we did say San Jose against the railroad. Anyway, I'm like thinking, okay, what are you talking about specifically that relates to my situation? Even though I want to know this stuff, and I really think that it's very fascinating, and I think I can see a whole lot of other elements, because again, the more I go into this situation, the more I realize how much more there is to know. There's always volumes and volumes of study and research, and you can get far afield very easily if you're following the wrong pathway. What I know, based on our years of research, my thousands of hours of what I've done, the millions of dollars that have gone into this isn't hyperbole for me. This has been my life with tens of thousands of hours where I've got the evidence. I know exactly who did what and when and how. That's why I know UCC code number 3. I know against the right of assignments. I know exactly what happened in the courts. I got thousands of hours on the shelf that I haven't been able to put into play because BlackRock, the largest asset manager on the freaking planet, owns
Yeah,
everything, and they did what they had to do to make sure we couldn't come through with the truth. But I'm not quite so sure the American people could get their head around the truth, even if we did, because right now people are so convoluted, they don't even have the right, understanding, because it's confusing the way the law is written to
it
begin
is.
with.
It
Okay,
is. It
so
is.
bring that full force, because the idea is, if you have the law, which you're telling me isn't the law, and we understand that corruption is king right now, and that we're a
Yes.
lawless society, and my entire Clean New Deal is just
Yes.
simply to take the law with integrity and destroy the corruption. That's just
And
the
that
way
would be
it's
really nice. I would love it if that were the whole case. Now, the issue that I have with the Clean New Deal. Now, I'm not saying that it is wrong. I'm not saying what I'm saying is I don't think the Clean New Deal necessarily addresses the fact that the United States is a corporation, who are owners, and it has owners. And who's to say that BlackRock isn't one of the owners, right? And if the BlackRock owns the United States, then it
Well,
makes a lot
they
of.
are the owner. They are the
This is what
United
I'm
States.
talking
Now,
about,
I don't know
right?
legally how that all fucking took place, or if it's legal. In fact, I
Right,
doubt it is. Even though they could have had, a
right,
myriad of attorneys that are way beyond my scope of capabilities,
right.
doing shit that I've never read before or seen, or and there's like this, that, and the other. The higher up the food chain you get, yeah, sure, and also justification of the CIA and all sorts of other bullshit,
Right.
right? But in secret states and so on and so forth, which is this hegemony of inverted perverted power, right? But
Yes.
that's still to the Clean New Deal, and I don't know how acquainted you are with the precepts of the Clean New Deal, but I start with
I've seen them.
these four
Yes.
questions, right? What is qualified immunity? What is judicial immunity? What is presidential immunity? And what is the Electoral College? Once you understand the perversions of the power matrix of the United States,
Yes.
you understand you're not a democracy. You're a corporate
Right.
fascist state undergirded by a.
You're a corporate, right? That's what I'm saying. It's like it's a corporation. It's not
Yeah,
actually a constitutional republic.
hell
And
no.
actually, those four precepts stem from the fact that the United States is a corporation.
Okay.
Okay. Like I don't think we can
Actually, I
that
know that
wouldn't.
for a fact in terms of the lawsuits. That's why they do it that way, to be able to
Yes.
protect themselves from the insurance to the counties.
From that's exactly right. That's exactly right. So so to even talk about the United States as a constitutional republic. Now, again, I think there's a lot of people that are just misinformed regarding that. We shouldn't be referring to it as a constitutional republic. We should be referring to the United States as a corporation because that's what it is. They have an EIN. Like the United States actually has like 4 different EINs. I mean, I actually have that on my
Doesn't
blog,
surprise me, but yeah.
by the way, right? I actually I paid $300 and I got access to an EIN database, and I went through and I looked up the EIN numbers for like all of the government agencies. I looked it up for the Federal Reserve. I looked up the EIN numbers for all the banks, all of the major law firms, Coy, for instance.
That's interesting. It was only $300 to get that information.
Yeah, I couldn't believe it would cost me that much just for it. I actually had to ask my friend to borrow $300 so I could get it, so I could get access to this EIN database, right? And there's a lot of really weird things in there. Like for instance, the White House actually has its own EIN separate from the United States,
Huh.
and the United States has its own separate EIN from Congress, which also has its own EIN separate from the Congress of DC. So there is an actual DC Congress, right? Because DC is its own state. Now it's not a part of the 50 states, but this is also a part of the issue is we don't have 50 states. We have 57 federal states, Puerto Rico, Guam, okay? Mariana, the Northern Marianas, okay? And Virgin Islands,
Okay.
okay?
I buy
Those
all.
are actual states within the federal government that are not a part of the 50 states. And they're called inchoate states. So they're not incomplete states. Okay. And this is one of the basis, by the way, of the IRS, which is a really interesting discussion in and of itself, is actually based in Puerto Rico. Okay. When you dive deep into that, there's some really weird stuff around Puerto
They've
Rico and the
offshored
IRS.
the IRS, really?
Yes. Yes. And there's a court case here. Diversified metal versus the IRS.
That's kind of fun.
And this is really wild. Okay. And I actually documented this. I spent 3 months working on a documentary called the Taxpayer Money Myth, Grace Commission Report. And it puts all of the things together, including the globalist nature of the IRS and their authority under the United Nations, and I mean how the World War II didn't actually end. There's law behind that too, by the way. Okay, which is this is one of the reasons why I think the United Nations they don't have the power, but they have the authority. Okay. And I think there is actually a distinction between power and authority. And a lot of people think, well, a dictator, the United Nations, they don't have power. And it's like, no, they don't need to have power, but they have the authority. And if you want to look at what the United Nations is actually doing, I highly recommend that you and everyone listening to this look up Executive Order 13107. Okay, which, by the way, is very interesting what that executive order is, because it creates a federal agency to align federal and states' laws with international treaties from the United Nations. Okay, so it's
okay. Again, let's just say I buy all that, right? But to your point about authority and power, look, and I did want to get into this with you because every time I saw that, my eyebrows raised. I'm like, okay, where's he going with this exactly? So let me hit the reboot and where we are, because we might have to have a follow-up conversation, because I want to go for like another 10 minutes, because I got another scheduled call here in a minute.
Yeah, for sure. I mean, I would love to
any
number that.
So let me just ask you a few things, okay? Just because I want to get some orientation to who you are in terms of your ideology, okay?
Yes.
Did the founding fathers wage a revolutionary war against tyranny vis-a-vis the entire composite of King George III, the East India Trading Company, the redcoats, and the globalism of that order at that time, to generate a Bill of Rights and a constitutional republic? Yes or no?
Oh, absolutely.
Okay, so you don't have one of those things where it's like the founding fathers were involved with some sort of global cabal that.
No.
Okay.
No. So I think they were legitimate. Now keep in mind that there were a bunch of attorneys who were
under the English crown,
signing, under the crown, signing on the Constitution itself. There are
and this and that, and they were with the redcoats until the revolution happened, and they got complicit because they're going to stay in the territories, and they probably became like the early families that had the largest real estate holdings, because we know the English have more real estate in the United States than anybody a foreign country, or actually probably more than anybody, quite frankly, except maybe the Mormon Church. Go ahead.
Yeah, I know, right? So okay, I'll let you. I want to continue with your questions, and I know time is running short. One of the things I wanted to say was, if you've read the U.S. Constitution, I highly recommend that you go read the Confederate Constitution.
I've never read the Confederate Constitution.
Mind-blowing. Like, this is actually what we want without the slavery. Okay, so if you take out the slavery aspect of the Confederate Constitution,
all right, they're more.
They're
more independent. Well, they were also the center of the universe, if you think about it, because of the cotton trade. But okay, so that's a question that's going to be way beyond this.
That's a whole other different conversation.
Yeah, I'm glad you said minus slavery, because I was going to be like, oh, okay, that's a revelation right there. Let's go to the Civil War then, okay? Because I know you prefaced the Civil War, and like, so for me, I've seen you be critical of Abraham Lincoln because of this whole corporation status, which I don't fully understand you're going to describe. But let me just say the caveat like this. Obviously, I know that Abraham Lincoln didn't wage war against the South primarily because of slavery. It was the abolitionists that evolved, and it certainly had a lot to do with it. But it was also, maintaining the power of the republic and everything. And so what I'm hearing from you, or I get a sense, but I didn't look at any of the details, is there were probably shortcuts taken, and there were probably some sort of martial law and everything else that went against the grain of whatever the whatever the rule was at the time to manifest whatever the outcome was. So what am I missing here, or what am I in the right space on?
So Lincoln was despite the fact that, first, let me say, he was the first attorney president.
Yeah.
Okay. Which to me, that says a lot. Now, at that point in time, we had attorneys established.
Not the last, but go ahead.
Yeah, most certainly not the last, right? But because of the fact that he was an attorney, he had an understanding of what the law is and does and how it works. This was one of the reasons why he issued the greenbacks. Okay, like, he understood what negotiable instruments were.
Sure.
Right. Even then, right? He understood what debt as money was, and one of the reasons why they unalived him was because he was doing the whole greenback in the face of what the international, even then at the international bankers, were the Rothschilds, wanted, which was to control the monetary system of the United States. Now, keep in
Okay,
mind,
now you're giving me the red flag that I was looking for. Let me bounce back here for a second.
yeah,
Even
yeah.
though I know who the Rothschilds were, and I know, look, I'm not an expert on all things Rothschild, but I know who they were in Central Europe during 1700s and 1800s and their role and everything else. I will tell you that I also know that they weren't the end all be all of Wall Street fraud by any stretch
No, you're right.
from the very beginning, and they were small players. Although they always had powerful people, and they bailed out fucking Trump,
Yes.
I'll tell you that. Wilbur
Yeah.
Ross was he was our former Commerce Secretary under Trump, who's bought up all the world on the cheap because of the nature of smash and grab, which is imperialism. But I know that
Hmm.
he came out of a Rothschild hedge fund, for example. But let me back up here to Lincoln, okay, and
Yes.
greenbacks. So we understand the legal tender and obviously the nature of debt, and so the legal definition, let's just call it UCC code at that time. I mean, it's just staying within the
Yeah.
negotiable instrument. Is staying within the theme of where we've talked about. How in the world did the Rothschilds seep into Abraham Lincoln? You're trying to tell me that the Rothschilds tried to own Lincoln? Go ahead.
I'm not saying that they tried to own Lincoln. No, no, no. I think Lincoln took an independent action on that because he saw that the United States didn't have enough money to fund the war.
Okay.
And so he started issuing the greenbacks to combat in other words,
Speculation on a
yeah, well, it is. We know that the greenbacks were a part of Lincoln's policy and that it didn't come externally. Now, I haven't looked very deeply into whether or not the Rothschilds supported the Confederacy, or I'm pretty sure they had their
Well,
hands in like every little
if
thing.
history is any lesson, they supported both because their whole role was
Exactly.
wars.
That's exactly right. They
They're just
supported both.
financiers. They weren't the guys that made the decisions on behalf of the kings
Right.
of England and France. They just were financing it. Not to say
Yes.
that makes them good guys or anything. They just happen to be good at finance. And then they did
Right.
front running, and then they also did front running was their big thing. That's where they
Right.
made
Yes. Oh, absolutely.
manipulation.
So there were two central banks before the Federal Reserve.
In the
Okay.
United
Most
States.
people in the United States, that's
Okay.
correct. Okay. And they didn't last for very long. Some of them lasted for like a decade or two. It wasn't a long period of time like we're seeing the Federal
Right.
Reserve.
During
Okay.
Adams, we had a central bank, but that was the battle between he and Jefferson, right?
There are, like I said, two central banks. And in the end, they were shut down because people did come to their senses and understand that these people were robbing us.
True.
Okay. The central banks, when they issue debt as money, they don't issue the interest. They only issue the principal. We have to actually spend our own energy, our own time, our own work effort to make, as the backing for new loans to pay the interest on the old loans.
True.
Okay. So, and because of the fact that the interest is never created, right, it becomes this cycle of debt and mortgages and loans that you can never get out of it. Okay. Now there's an interesting
Well, I don't
fact
know
I'd
if
like
that
to.
was true back then. It is now. There's no
It
question.
definitely is now. Oh, back then it was still gold. We were still on the
Well,
gold
true,
standard.
true. Yeah,
So
absolutely.
it wasn't quite the same. Like today, when we went on fiat from
71.
yeah, 71 under Nixon. Okay.
But
That
it became the oil global standard. So we replaced gold
Yes,
with oil. That's the commodities
yes.
of it all.
Which
That's
is the
what we're
reason why they don't want to get us off of oil. Like
yeah. Okay, so
the
you would
whole.
like to see us go to a renewable energy paradigm?
I think they are hiding free energy.
Okay, well, okay, but would you like, because see, the Clean New Deal, the whole point of the Clean New Deal is to get rid
Right.
of the lawlessness, to be able to prove that we've
Yes.
already, since
Yes.
2009, manufactured $71 trillion that I can forensically show you. It's the easiest fucking thing in the world. It's all public.
Yeah.
It's just you have to,
Yes, I know.
people have to know where it was and where it came from and why, and that includes the 16 trillion in quantitative easing. But what was the quantitative easing purchasing? The fucking illegal foreclosures of these notes that the standing didn't have, that they were.
Right.
So I've got the evidence of Raj Cohen from Sullivan and Cromwell, who negotiated on behalf of the consortium, the 13
Mhm.
banks of the United States, and this happened through the Federal
Very
Business
interesting.
Inquiry Commission. that ultimately he
Yes.
said he didn't know how deep the derivatives went. He just admitted it.
Right.
He
Yeah.
said they had the
Yeah.
collateralized debt obligations and the CVO swaps and
Quadrillions.
everything else. They didn't know how big it was, so they had to fucking pump. And this is how they got around and through and over
Right.
based on the 98 secret meetings between Paulson and Bernanke and Geithner and all the people
Right.
that were involved with this whole thing. And so it's funny that Trump is like, oh, yeah, we got to go after Jerome Powell for not lowering interest rates when Jerome Powell's
Yeah.
insider trading and part of the whole fucking military industrial complex
Right.
the whole
Right.
fucking time, you nitwit motherfucker. Pardon my language. But the long and the short of it is, dude. So look, man, legal fiction, money, who owns what, whose interest, who's diabolically in control, I think is where we're going, right? And that the law is a
Yes.
fiction. And so, let's try to summarize in his, because there's a lot more I want to ask you, but I don't have all the details on all this stuff. I have the
Right.
details on
Yes.
what I know. Oh yeah, I know where I was going. The Clean New Deal. So GDP is approximately $25 trillion in the United States globally. I mean, annually, and we're the largest, GDP in the world. China's catching up, of course. We have the technology. We know what we're doing. People always go, where are we going to find the money? We've got the money. The money is not, it's a fiction anyway. I mean, even though we
Right.
don't,
You can create it out of nothing.
but
And
right.
now,
The banks can get, but it's just who's got the money and why. We've got
right.
we've got MMT for criminals, is what I say, because
Yes. Oh,
he
absolutely.
talks about how how we don't fund the government with taxes, which we don't because they put all this stuff
Right.
and then it becomes
There
debt.
is no taxpayer money. That's actually what the whole point of
You
my
said that earlier.
documentary,
Yes.
The Taxpayer Money
Right.
Myth.
Final piece
Not
of
a single
the
dollar that
Green
we
New Deal.
spend.
What I'm saying is, if you get rid of the corruption and the pollution of pedophilia and all this other fucking nonsense and this gross cabal of these assholes that have complete control, we break them. We smash and grab them because we're not expendable. They're expendable. This is who I'm. This is me speaking. That we
Right.
can reboot and recharge and redeem the dream and find a new productive capacity for the next 100 years and maybe learn the lesson. But the bottom
Yes.
line is, I don't know if we're ever going to get there without a new civil war. I'm not sure what happens next.
I kind of feel the same way. It's like the only way that we're going, and it may not turn it into a violent civil war. It may just turn up that people can't afford groceries, that they can't afford their mortgage, they can't afford electricity. They can't, because I mean, a part of it comes directly from the 2008 financial crisis, which they created so much money, and they all know inflation is not a problem. So why do you think they just removed the M3 as a metric for the measure of inflation, right? Because they don't want us to see. And this is where I think the shadowstats.com guy is doing some really amazing work. Now, he did put it behind a paywall, and I have not had access to the paywall because money. But basically, he recreates the M3. He recreates the U3, the unemployment rate,
Sure.
the U6 as well.
Yeah.
And what we are seeing is the unemployment rate is actually at 25+% right now.
See, I wouldn't be surprised by that, or that I'm not sure how the metric is. I think most people have 2 or 3 jobs, right? They just can't afford what the appraisal
They
price
can't
is.
afford things. That's right. So inflation is going out of
Because we
control.
gave trillions of dollars to billionaires to hyperinflate this based on what we show you in the con because of the blueprint of how appraisal fraud works. And then we've got, a legal system with, state AG Letitia James, who doesn't know how to prosecute control fraud because she was never going to the bank. She finished at Trump. Trump got it from the bank. He was doing the dance with the bank. He was doing the dance, and they were just a small piece of this. And now we're seeing all this stuff with Epstein. Epstein was involved with liquid capital that got bailed out by Maiden Lane, One that was coming through JP Morgan Chase. They're involved with all this stuff, and there's billions and trillions of dollars from all around the world from illicit gains pumped into the system. Go ahead.
Okay, so if we took all of the money that we gave the banks nationally and internationally, and we gave that to the people, every single mortgage would be paid off right now.
Oh yeah.
Okay. Now the problem with that is if you pay off every mortgage, if you pay off the national debt, we don't have any money. There's going to be no money out in society if we pay off the national debt. The national debt is where our dollar comes from. Okay. Yeah. And that's a really big problem. right?
Well,
Because the more,
globally, based on the financial fuel paradigm, I've been told the BRICS decide to fucking, what's it called, crypto their way out of the shit, of which Trump
right.
is in the midst of.
I know
And
that
that's
that's a
unfair.
whole nother can of worms.
Yeah.
And I would love to sit down and have another conversation with you in the future. We can have multiple.
Well, let's do. But
I'm
give me,
open.
give me a worldview. Just tell me where we are right now, based on the
Okay,
rules that you're.
I have my little notes right here.
Sure.
The first one is that the United States is a corporation. Okay, and we can't ignore that, you know. And the second thing is we've got these national emergencies that we're still operating under. That needs to be fixed. You know, the Federal Reserve we identified, and that is actually one of the major problems. And I think you're spot on with all of that. Okay, again, the con.tv, very interesting. Everyone go check that out. And then the other I think is the United Nations. Okay, and we didn't really talk very much about
Oh
the
yeah,
United
go ahead.
Nations because you know that, like I said, that's a whole nother can of worms.
Power versus authority. But let me just bring up the
Yeah,
last 25 years. Okay, so the United Nations. Okay, let me get my construct here, because I wanted to throw this at you because we haven't had time to really go into it. But I've heard this type of stuff too, especially from sovereign citizens, about the overreach of the United Nations. The United Nations can't stop Trump from bombing Iran. The United Nations can't stop Netanyahu from a genocide in Gaza. The
that's right.
United Nations cannot stop Putin in Ukraine and everything. The bottom line is the United Nations is in such disarray anyway, that whatever
Yes.
authority that they may have, I'm not paranoid about their overreach. Now, I can think about, we had the League of Nations, we had the United Nations after World War II. I get the whole, relationship. I get, the veto power of the nuclear nations, and, but from where I'm sitting since the 90s, especially as it relates to reining in, pollution and global climate crisis, and not to mention crisis with ecosystems failing, right? And
Yeah.
also animals going into what do we call it when their bloodlines, when they're all complete, when it's done, when they go
Extinction.
extinction, the extinction paradox. I look at the United Nations, a body that can't achieve really anything.
And you're right. You're right, but okay, the authority of all of these United Nations member states to do what they're doing comes from the United Nations. Okay, we know that the United Nations Charter operates under law of war. Okay, it's a war institution. It came out of war.
I thought it was
We
supposed to
know
be
that
a
they
peace
can
institution because of war.
exactly, and we know that the United Nations still is operating under war. They let me put it like this: you can look it up in the Law of War manual from the Department of Defense that international humanitarian law is substantially equal to law of war. Okay, so you can't talk about humanitarian law without actually going and looking at law of war. And it's under the law of war manual from the Department of Defense. It's even updated in 2023.
Right. But like, for example, international law and all of the other things, and I'm not just talking about what goes on in what is it called, The Hague, right? But
Yes,
Netanyahu is a war criminal all over the place, and he's accepted in the United States, and
that's right, because we're also war criminals here.
right.
Okay,
But my point
and
is that if the United Nations, couldn't arrest him if they wanted to, right? Or they
no,
haven't.
well, the United Nations wouldn't, but the member states have the authority to do so. And there are several UN member states that have said, we will arrest him if he comes to us.
Well, that's what I
And
I remember that. Yeah, the most recently, I'm sure there's several in Europe, but yeah. Anyway, please
right.
continue. But what I'm
So,
talking about is the power and the influence of the United Nations.
right. So this is where I think it's really important to talk about that there is actually this thing called the United Nations National. Okay. As in, like we think of ourselves as US nationals, right? Like a US citizen, by the way, is not the
Although
same
you
thing.
pointed out that means nothing because of the federal government.
That's right. That's right. So, like a U.S. citizen, I mean, I recommend that people look this up. 15 United States Code Section 4724 gives the definition of the United States citizen as a corporation. Okay, you can look it up. It's right there. It's
United
really
States, the United States citizen is a corporation.
that's correct. You are not a corporation. Okay, and technically it's a trade show. That's actually what that is. And it says for the purposes of this section, which is trade shows, a U.S. business is a U.S. citizen. Now, that's not to say that, as a U.S. business, yes, that term as a U.S. citizen is limited to that section. But in the inverse, a U.S. citizen defined as a business applies globally to all of the statutes. Everywhere you see a U.S. citizen is a trade show. Okay, and this is the reason why we as U.S. citizens do not have rights, because corporations don't have rights. They don't have common law rights. Okay, again, common law versus statutes, right? So at the common law, like a good example of how that works is at the common law, we have the right to travel, which includes being in a car without a license. Now, I don't recommend that people drive without insurance, but you don't necessarily need a license to drive because that's a commercial activity, which again, if you look up the term driver, and I'm not saying that the current edition of Black's Law Dictionary contains this definition, they didn't change it, but if you go back to edition like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 in there, the definition of driver is exclusive to commercial activity. So to have a driver's license means that you are engaged in a commercial activity. Even though you're not getting paid, your U.S. citizenship is a commercial entity.
Okay, I'm not going to go into the micro sort of definition of that, but I do know that, of course, when we get our driver's license, they do have different categories and different test standards for commercial.
Yeah, and this is a whole nother conversation, but I just wanted to point out for people, if they wanted to do that research, you can look it up. I'm planning on eventually doing a video on it on my channel, GovCorp Watch, and on YouTube, by the way.
What's the relevance to the citizenship and our freedoms under at least?
So a business doesn't have rights; they have privileges. Okay, and right. As a business, right. As a U.S. citizen, as a U.S. citizen, which is a trade show, the reason why they don't recognize us as real, actual human beings at the common law in court is because of this distinction between a legal identity and who we are, right? So this plays out to the whole idea that there are actually two sets. When you look at the Constitution and you say, okay, we've got the people, and we assume we are the people, but that's not necessarily true because we've got two sets of the people. We've got ourselves as actual human beings, Homo sapiens, at the common law in substance, and then you have the game pieces, like Homo legalis, that are the people within the system that attorneys confuse us with it. So they're taking these two sets of the people and merging them when they can't be merged. Legal is a separate realm.
Well, interestingly enough, I buy that, but like all things, look, I hate to say the reality of what I've learned in my life is that, at least based on power, is right equal or might equals right. Okay, and that goes for. I'm not saying that I agree with that. I'm saying the application of it. And what do we see in the courts? The courts will do whatever the fuck they want. If you get a DUI, for example, you get a different track in the driver's license division that throws out all your civil rights. You know what I'm saying?
Right.
So
that's why.
Okay, well that makes sense too, right? So
yeah, exactly.
I know that there's all of these different variables, and then again, like I saw in the 2008 great financial crisis, every single foreclosure that was happening during a specific time, if the judges understood what was going on or got paid to be a neutral arbiter, and they were going off the evidence, they would easily see that the foreclosing party didn't have standing. But that's not what they were paid to do. What we ended up doing is we got 3 or 4 different senior guys out of retirement that we paid them to go and basically be what we call not just robo-signing. Well, robo-signing was part of it in reverse in terms of rocket dockets. And the rocket dockets are part of the shadow docket right now with some of the stuff that's going on with Trump and Doge. But again, who's going to stop them is the question, right?
That's the question. And I think, to me, the solution is personal. I don't think there's going to be a collective ability to address this until we address it ourselves by removing their power. And I don't necessarily know how to. Yeah, well, 98% of taxes
you're saying a
paid.
Tea Party in 2025? Because I know the people out there like, I'm not going to pay for ICE. Fucking
exactly.
Gestapo in my streets when they're covered.
This part of the conversation is really interesting because and it's on congressional record. Okay, they put it on congressional record that 98% of IRS taxes paid are paid voluntarily.
That makes sense.
Now
Yeah,
the
well,
question is
especially if you're an independent business guy, because I've experienced this myself. They don't do any audits unless you turn in your, I mean, look,
yeah,
hint to people that are in business for themselves. It's mostly don't. If what's the word I'm looking for? If you don't look, you don't find. And the bottom line is, if you give them the information, they're going to look. I mean,
right.
go ahead.
Right. So a lot of people might say, yeah, well, we're required to pay taxes. And it's like you are actually required to pay taxes when you volunteer to make it mandatory, right? If you don't volunteer to make it mandatory, then you don't need to pay it.
So there's certain
Okay?
laws that took place in, let's say, when did we start? It was 1913 that we had the income tax, right? Was that when it started?
Yeah, Federal Reserve. Yeah, along with the Federal Reserve.
Well,
We
that's
had
how
to
they
pay the
finance.
interest.
That's how they initially financed the government. Now they do it with global capital flows, and including
Yes.
if economists don't even give a shit if it's dark money through prostitution or
Right.
children being sold into slave. Money is money. That's the way economists look at it. I mean, seriously, they don't even
Yeah.
differentiate between the dark economy and the in
Right.
the legal economy.
We could pay them nothing in taxes, and still the entire US federal government would be paid in full by magic money computers. Now, I know your feelings on Elon Musk. I'm not I
Wait a second.
agree.
I'm the one who said, before you go into Elon, I know exactly that's how we finance the government. What you just said.
Yes. Yes.
Absolutely.
Magic money
It's also
computers.
by congressional decree with the power of the purse. You want the power of war. They're going to freaking manifest whatever the budget is.
That's right. Well, this is the reason why we the people cannot stop these wars, because they're not using our money.
Well, it's
And if
also
they're not using
yeah. No,
right,
that's
if they're not using our money, then they don't need to listen to
what were you
us to
about to say
stop the
about Elon
wars.
Musk.
So he was the one. He was the one that basically made it more public that we use magic money computers. Okay,
Yeah, and he's the beneficiary of it.
and that's also one of the things that he discovered too.
That's why I keep saying he's a complete idiot because I'm like, dude, do you not know that? And no, the government of the United States can't go bankrupt when they're the
Right.
issuers of the currency and they're buying the debt.
That's right.
Yeah, the Chinese invest in it, and Germany and everybody else, but they're not the issuers of our debt, just like Australia. That's fiat currency, man.
Yes.
And
Yes.
to the people out there that are like, oh, well, it's just paper digits. No, it's nuclear weapons. It's freaking timber. It's the best university. I mean, there's value there. You can't, but what is the value arbitrary? We could get into many conversations. Here's
Right.
the bottom line
Yes.
for where I'm coming from, and let's see how you
Yes.
respond to this, and we'll take it forward. And your website again. Remind everybody where they can go see more of your information.
I'm on YouTube under Gov Corp Watch, right? Because the government is a corporation. So Gov Corp Watch. And you can find my channel on YouTube. And I think my website is govbanknotes.wordpress.com.
I'll look at both of those
Okay.
because it's interesting because you touched on into some stuff that I do know about, not just passingly. I know exactly what
Deeply.
UCC Code 3 is, and I know what the right assignments are, and I know what standing
Yeah.
is, and I know what
Yeah.
the freaking rules and regulations are for property ownership, and I know what the laws
Yeah.
are that surround this, and I know exactly what the judiciary didn't do. And it's so funny in Donald Trump world where we finally get to see that the Supreme Court's completely corrupt, but people are like, oh yeah, it's the lower courts that are saving the country from Donald Trumpism. But the bottom line is they sold us out during the freaking 2008 great financial crisis.
That's correct.
And then
And the question is why? The question is why?
yeah,
Now
they
here
got paid by because I'll tell
that they
you
got
why,
paid,
because
but there's
the Obama
there.
administration let Wall Street manage its own affairs. It wasn't the
Yes.
government that got us out of the
Right.
2008 great financial crisis. They just said, here you go. And then, by the way, the Federal Reserve is supposed to be mandated by Congress. Thank you very much. And the whole
Yes.
point is that it's not because of the nature of what. Go ahead.
Right. Right. So there's 2 points that I want to make. One is there is actually evidence out there that the International Monetary Fund has taken over as basically the parent company of the Federal Reserve. Okay, which I'm not asking you to believe that. I'm saying there's evidence out there for that.
I think they're
Okay,
completely in collusion, and I think
you're right. That's exactly right. And
but I know about, for example, technically, like what am I thinking about? All the stuff that happened at God, it'll come to me in just a second. And of course, I know of what happens in Switzerland at what is that once a year meeting, and I'm not talking about the
Davos.
Davos, and the Bilderberg Group to a lesser extent.
Yep.
It's been around for a long time. Yes, I understand IMF. I understand the capital flows. What was I trying to think of? There's because all of this stuff landed at the IMF because of the deregulation in capital markets. Oh God,
Yeah.
it'll come to me. But look, yeah, I've been down that road. Okay, so
Yes.
let me just
So
go ahead. You first.
the Glass-Steagall, one of the reasons why it was reversed was because there was an international pressure coming from, international bankers, but also from the United Nations, by the way, okay, to deregulate the United States in that way. The United States, by the way, was the only country in the world that had those kind of regulations that separated investment
That's
banking from
right.
traditional
That's
banking.
exactly right.
Okay. And the thing is that you can't internationalize, which that's the direction everything is headed, by the way. Okay. You can't internationalize banking when you have the United States, the largest of the bankers, the banking places, with these
Let's be
laws
the
that,
global reserve currency.
yeah, you can't have these laws in that way. Now, that's not to say we shouldn't have it, but that's also a reason why they don't want to actually put it in place. They don't want to reinstate Glass-Steagall because of the international standardization of banking.
Okay,
Okay.
so let me throw out the precepts of the Clean New Deal and then we'll close out. But I want to just ask you each in one of my because I want to see how you respond to it because we've kind of
Yeah.
gone down this path a little bit. But okay, so the first precept of the Clean New Deal, first one is a new Glass-Steagall. But here's the situation. And for those of you who don't know Glass-Steagall, it creates an alignment of interest, but you cannot gamble with other people's money using the racketeering enterprise to do it, especially the way it was written in 1933. Like I said earlier, using the commodities, particularly in real estate. You can't use the
Mhm.
full faith and credit of the United States to create exigent lending for that. And what I would add to that in our presets and what we do add to it is that you have to have the caveat that says you cannot provide exigent lending to racketeering enterprises, as ridiculous as that sounds. I mean, it's
Mhm.
just fucking stupid.
It
Okay,
is.
you want to comment on that?
It absolutely is ridiculous. And I heard your analogy with the gambling,
Casino. The
the
casino.
casinos. Yes, the casino. I heard that before and was like, it's so perfect, because you need to bring it down from this like intellectual side of things for people to really
True.
understand. And
True.
I think that you
Basil.
did that.
Basil is what I was thinking of. Basil 1 and 2
Yes,
from the
yes,
IMF.
and there needs to be new international banking in order to put that in place, right?
Right, but
And
to me again. Okay, so here's okay. Look, you obviously know what the precepts are, and I'm not going to go through it again because that was the key consideration that I wanted you because you've already talked about Citizens United, and we've already talked about qualified immunity, presidential immunity, um,
yeah,
uh, judicial immunity, and the electoral college. But you also comment on something else that's part of the Clean New Deal. We want to get rid of congressional insider trading because it's
oh,
fucking
absolutely,
ridiculous
oh,
that guys that are around for and then
for sure,
but if you're Mitch McConnell and you're any of these guys that have been around forever, right? Chuck Schumer and of course why can't I think of her name out of Pelosi? These
yeah,
guys have been there forever. They go in, they end up worth hundreds of millions of dollars on the
hundreds of millions, yeah,
and it's like, okay, what are you invested in? Especially when you're
yeah,
thinking about ICE and some of these other things. It's like, are you
right,
kidding me? That's legal corrupt. And so
it
that's just
is.
ridiculous. And then we talk about the Supreme Court has to be expanded. Okay, that's
So
basically
one last point, and then I'll let you go about your business, and we can share this, and we can start even on this the next if and when, right? One of the audio clips that I have, and I've shared this on my YouTube channel before. I actually have a county prosecutor telling me that, quote, his masters are the United Nations. So this is literally a state court prosecuting attorney
yeah,
saying this. Now,
authority
there's a lot of interesting
authority
things
power.
about that.
Okay, so there's a guy who decides he's going to give the power to and he's going to use that. Okay, and then you've got that on camera, and I'm sure somebody who they could challenge. Look, here's the nth degree about the Clean New Deal. Okay, it's common sense from
Yes,
this perspective,
it
right?
is. It should be.
Don't
Yes,
lie, steal, and cheat and get away with it in a way that destroys tens of millions of people, especially when we've
that's right.
got the evidence. It's just basically what we think of in common sense, common
That's
law.
correct.
And
Common law.
Yeah.
thank you. That's what I was about to say. It's
It's not
common law.
rocket science, it's racketeering. And so that's what this is
It
all
is.
about. Because where we are now, and this is what I tell people all the time, we have been a runaway train wreck of corruption for now decades. It just gets
Yes.
worse and worse and
And
worse.
worse. And absolutely.
At Trump, and we haven't talked about your ideology about Trump and everything else, and I don't want to get into it now. But the guy's an idiot no matter how you square it up.
Yes,
He doesn't know
I
shit.
agree.
He's a fucking he's a larcenous, treacherous, and obviously involved with covering up pedophilia, regardless of what is it. Just a gross human being in the
Yeah.
most important position in the world, which is losing credibility by the day. But why? Because the system of corruption. That's it.
Right. It's to protect it. It is. He's protecting it.
That's
And
it.
he even admitted that he knows the system and he's using it.
Well,
Right.
I don't know how well he knows the system, but I can tell you he didn't come up with what Project 2025 came up with. I
right.
didn't see, even though it's in the paper. I finally read it completely, and it's amazing how transparent it was. And I was aware of it before, but what these guys have done with the flood the zone strategy, only the technocrats and this guy who's the guy who who's being responsible for Project 2025. What is his name? I know it's the Koch brothers and the Heritage Institute. Yeah. But what's the guy who's at the apex of it? What do you remember his name?
I don't know off the top of my
head. Who I'm inferring, right? But anyway,
yes.
These guys knew everything there is about the goings on of how things get done. And they just completely were like, okay, nobody's going to stop us. To that point about the judge who's like, oh, I'm going to call out the, United Nations as my master. Okay, who's going to stop us on the UCC code? Hey, who's going to stop me? Rubber stamping. That's why I'm here. I got paid to foreclose against the law and all of these things because nobody's going to stop me. That's power. Right. That's how power operates. And until we turn the tables on it with the truth, that's my whole position.
One of the questions for me is, what is the governing law that governs governing law?
What is the governing law that governs governing law? Okay, well,
that's a question for the new untouchables.
Well, okay,
not for now, but
that's fine. But where we are in this process is a lawless presidency. So what we're dealing with is triage using certain state legislatures that can subpoena through whistleblowers, through the right methodologies to turn the tables on crimes that are happening right now. That could be done. But go ahead. Okay.
Again, that's all legal though, right? And legal, we know, is compromised. So it may or may not happen. Right.
It can happen without the political will and courage.
Exactly. Like you actually there has to be something real, something substantial, and not just color of law, right? You can't just have the appearance of this stuff. You actually have to have substance. And attorneys are willing to act on substance, but not always, not all of them. And I think.
Go ahead.
And that's where I would like to see the new untouchables be more straightforward with the people, the audience, telling us this is what the system is and why it works the way it is. And that's not to say that they're not wrong. They're not wrong. Okay. They are doing a fantastic job within the system. But you have to understand there's a bigger system than the legal system. And again, I'm a systems expert, right? So, and this is also one of the reasons why I see law in a more, let's just call it objective way, is because I am not necessarily within the system. I studied the systems. I'm technically outside the system. I've done what is necessary to remove myself from the system. Expatriation, that's a whole nother conversation. And why that happens and how that happens and, what solutions that I've enacted for myself as a world citizen. And I know that sounds contradictory, but there's reasons for that. And like I said, this conversation can go 1,000 different ways, but we also need to wrap it up. So.
Right. And the thing that I'm wrapping up is, yes, there is a system of a global cabal of cooperation between billionaires all over the world that are using leverage of the dark money system and pipelines, everything else to guarantee their own positions and their own fiefdom.
Absolutely.
That's what we're talking about.
I couldn't agree more.
Okay.
And that's one of the reasons why I so appreciate your work, your advocacy, and the facts that you do share with everybody, because it's brilliant. More people need to know this stuff. This is one of the reasons why I'm attracted to your work and who you are, because you point out these things that most people are unaware of, and you do so in a way that actually grounds it, like the casinos, right? And it makes a lot of sense. I appreciate that. I can see how, like from a systems standpoint, I can see where your function is in terms of grounding all of these things for people to understand and to grasp.
Well, right on.
So,
I just believe in right and wrong and good and evil and doing the right thing and then
common law.
beating down the bad guys. And that's just who I am and where I
Yes.
come from. So, hey, everybody check out the cleannewdeal.org, check out the con.tv, check out gov.corp watch. Yeah.
GovCorp Watch at
GovCorp watch.
YouTube.
Yep.
Yes, GovCorp Watch.
And then tune in and we'll connect again. But it's nice to finally connect with you.
Likewise. Likewise. Thank you. I appreciate this and God bless.
Yeah. All the best to you. Take care.